Yeah, but I think we should start off by talking about Proudhon's conception of God, which is very
Yeah.
interesting because it manages to peeve both atheists and Christians. So, funnily enough, he made another short addendum that's also on the Anarchist Library, kind of clarifying because he was a politician at one point and he was heavily criticized for not being a devout theist, so to speak.
hmm Um, Let me see. I'm looking at my notes real quick.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I guess we'll talk about this, but the first page he says, God, the great unknown, has become for me an hypothesis. I mean, a necessary dialectical tool. It's kind of like, why is he starting off with God on an economic book?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right there, he's foreshadowing what he's going to be
yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
Necessary dialectical tool. I made sure I wrote that down. Like before the first paragraph even ends, he says that like for him to proceed intelligibly, he needs to get this across. So like he's telling you pay attention because this is going to be important for making sure you understand the rest of what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so which is why I was like, I got like halfway through the introduction and it took me forever because I was like really trying to pay attention.
I had to go through it like 3 or 4 times to really get a clear idea of what he's talking about. So the God is evil stuff, that doesn't come up now. That's at the end of the first volume. I
Mm-hmm.
was talking about that before when I was writing about the God stuff, but we'll keep that to the side for now. I think the quote that he starts out with on the second page is real important. I'll read it. If I follow the God idea through its successful transformations, I find that this idea is preeminently social. I mean by that I mean by this that it is much more a collective act of faith than an individual conception. I don't know. That for me is like very important.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that
vital.
yeah. Today people tend to think of God in their own unique ways, in their individualistic ways. But like back in the day, it's like that is the God that, and it had characteristics attributed to it. Today we try to perfect God into this perfect creature. I don't
Uh-huh.
know.
There are two things that caught my eye, and he says basically deteriorates in two conditions, that of isolation and that of stagnation. So God is basically
Mm,
what he says the dialectical tool. It's like an agent of change almost.
yeah, and the proceeding in stages, like there's different across space and time. There's different across societies. Like there's different conceptions of God that like kind of coincide with that society in question. I'm not really explaining it well, but
Yeah.
um,
What also caught me off guard was he seemed to be interested in the Chinese. Like he quoted Lao Tzu, I believe, in one of the
He
yeah,
does.
beginning.
he called them what do you call them? He called them stagnant or stationary or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So in the
Um,
philosophy of science world, they do continue. They today even say that about Chinese world is that it kind of there's not a lot of movement, and the fact that it's Confucian and it's kind of stayed still for long periods of time,
That's very
and
true.
that's why they say they never developed modern science, the Chinese. Whereas in the Middle East, it's much more kind of moving, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
um, that's something that it reminded me a bit of how Marx and Engels said that like or the Oriental mode of production is stagnated, like the march of history just ended in the Oriental countries. Is how they put it at the time, which has been challenged, of course, by people who are from that part of the world. Like, dudes, what the fuck? It's
Yeah.
Eurocentric as hell. But um, yeah,
Yeah. Then he goes, and this I'm just gonna keep reading unless anybody objects.
Yeah, you can be
Uh,
the headmaster.
mm,
okay. General Secretary. Uh,
general secretary.
Down, he says, this mysterious faculty, wholly intuitive and so to speak super social, scarcely or not at all perceptible in persons, but which hovers over humanity like an inspiring genius, is the primordial fact of all psychology. To me, what he's saying is that's the beginning of psychology. It starts with God. God is the initial foundation. It's like, and this is you really get into the weeds with sociology, you kind of come back to this, and that it's the social is first. And then after the social, you kind of get to where we are now, which is very individualistic. First is the we, if that makes sense. And then,
Mm-hmm.
and the we, I might not be explaining that well, but the we is like a God-like understanding of it's socially constructed and that we're all together and we're all enacting this one thing being real, if that makes sense.
I think I understand what you mean, like a collective reality, almost like yeah.
Right.
There's like an objectivation in Berger and Luckman's terms of the inner experiences, and like God arguably is something that's objectivated, it's socially constructed in that sense,
Mm-hmm.
and through that objectivation, through that social construction, becomes a real force, whether or not it's a literal like deity that exists outside that's transcendent. It is something that has like real effects on the world because we make it have real effects on the world.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And
Um,
then on the next page, I wanted to ask Devin about this because I don't really know about this stuff. About the me, he talks about, so he says, I'll start up, it's right at the top of the third page. I don't know what books you guys have.
I have like a Google document.
Okay.
What's well, I can search in it though.
But he says, okay, I'll just start at the where he says, I am me in quotation marks. God said to Abraham. I didn't
Okay.
know that God said that to Abraham. I am me.
I don't remember him saying that to Abraham.
Oh, okay.
But
I didn't know if there's something I'm
see,
missing
but
there.
he says to Moses, um, "I am that I am," and that's like there's a few different interpretations of that. Like I am just I am being itself. I'm just the thing that always was and always will be, sort of thing. But it could also like there's also a reading of that that's like Moses says, "Who are you?" and God just says, "I am who I am, and never you fucking mind." You know. um. So
Didn't someone ask Jesus, who are you? And he says, I am, or something like that.
I I think there's like some like there's a lot of places in the New Testament where the New Testament writers purposefully invoke things from the Old Testament to make Jesus seem more like God. So it wouldn't surprise me. I don't remember a specific quote, but um, yeah.
Speaking of Jesus, should we go over God Man?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's good. Yeah, that's coming. That's coming.
Okay.
I'm
that
gonna have
was
an
that
idea.
was pretty Hegelian, honestly. I think I'm not like a pro on Hegel at all, but like my understanding of Hegel's like theology, I think that is very much there. We'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, here's that quote you're talking about on the third page. It's easy to see why isolation and status quo, I guess he's saying, are alike fatal to it. So yeah, when you're not enacting God, it kind of, in my understanding, it kind of loses its emotional control over the people who enact it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it's like any kind of institution, really. Like if it doesn't have anybody participating in it, then it kind of ceases to be. Like
Hmm.
making it real through our actions is kind of how it becomes real. And if you're not enacting, like you said, like, enacting was a good word. Like if you're not enacting, then it just ceases to be a thing. Because it's not being made objective anymore.
Hmm.
Um,
Then on the next page, I don't know, if anybody, you can stop me anytime. He writes, in fact, admitting that God is nothing more than collective instinct or universal reason, we have still to learn what this universal reason is in itself. For as we shall show directly, universal reason is not given in individual reason. In other words, the knowledge of social laws or the theory of collective ideas, though deduced from the fundamental concepts of pure reason, is nevertheless wholly empirical and never would have been discovered a priori by means of deduction, induction, or synthesis. So again, he's starting everything with the idea of God. Like that's, and then
yeah,
now he's trying to see what is this?
I highlighted like that whole paragraph.
Yeah.
Eh, 1 second. Universal reason, which just yeah. Sorry, go on. I was trying to catch up on.
No, that's all I was going to read.
Um,
But yeah, it starts with God, and now we're at this point where we're starting to be able to like, well, what is this? Questioning what is it just a delusion, or I think most people view God, and that's he talks about how atheism is kind of just a negation of all of it, and saying it's all a bunch of horse shit. Like I don't want to listen to any of it. But he's saying no, there's something there. It has some kind of our past has some kind of real element of a godlike entity hovering above it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like it's not as simple as saying like God doesn't exist. Let's move on. Like there's something else going on there. There's something that has been, you know, there's a facticity to God. Um,
Like I
and
said, objectivity, because
yeah,
God is
yeah.
not like objective because there's one.
hmm it's complicated as shit. Like,
Yeah.
Like, what does he exactly mean by God has objectivity?
Okay.
If I heard right.
So, what is objectivity? That's when things get confusing. A lot of times people assume objectivity is something outside of humanity. It's something we're trying to go find.
I think this is what
Go ahead.
what he's trying to fundamentally get out. He says this, I think in part 3 of the preface, is essentially the me and the not me at its most fundamental. I think like he's trying to find the governing thing that's like organizing society from its past to its present, how it changes, like the fundamental aspect of that. So when he's saying it's objective, it exists outside of us, even though we're its fundamental. Like God cannot exist outside of us, but God can't exist without us. If that makes sense. Like it's kind of a reciprocal relationship. He notes.
What's a relationship? I didn't know. I don't know that English word.
reciprocal.
Yeah.
If I try to come up with a definition on the spot, I'm gonna botch it.
I can try to find the paragraph.
Just type it. I'll just translate it.
Yeah, reciprocal, given, felt, or done in return. So like something. So like a reciprocal like relationship is one where we give something back to each other instead of just me giving you something and that's it. You give something back to me for me giving you something.
Okay.
Reciprocity is like when stuff is reciprocal. That's like really important for mutualists.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
So I'm going to keep going. So my understanding is that God to him is just it's society, but basically it's created by society and it's real, and he's conceiving as God as a social thing. Then he says, from his collective me, taken as a superior pole of creation, to the last atom of matter, man extends then the idea of God, that is, the idea of personality and intelligence, just as God himself extended heaven, as the book of Genesis tells us, that is created space and time, the conditions of all things. I think that's a good point about space and time being social constructions. Like space and time do not just come from people existing on the planet. Rather, they come out, if we're conceiving of God as the first kind of thing holding collective reason together, from God comes this idea of space and time. So it's like we're starting with God, and then from that we're getting this collective reason, of this collective categories that are unfolding out of the idea of God. If that makes sense.
So I looked this up just because I was curious. It reminds me a little bit of Feuerbach, just like kind of, I don't know if secularizing is the right word, but like, the Feuerbachian idea that is like God is like made in the image of man. Like it reminds me a little bit of that. So I just looked up. Feuerbach wrote Essence of Christianity in 41. Proudhon was writing this 45, 46 is when it was published, I think. But Proudhon didn't read German, so whether or not he had access to Feuerbach,
You were
that's
talking
an
with
open question.
Grun at this time. Karl Grun calls Proudhon the French Feuerbach.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, and yeah, he's talking with all the Germans as he's writing this, who have came there as refuge from crackdown in Germany. And yeah, they're all telling him about Hegelian ideas and Feuerbachian ideas. Yeah, Karl Grun is the main one who becomes his teacher, who Marx kind of hates Grun. Like they resent each other.
Let's see. So I've actually got a lot highlighted in this first section, but I'm trying to figure out like what's worth talking about.
See, first he's saying we made God, and then what we start doing next is to destroy him. So we've created this we-ness among everybody, and then now we start breaking him down. At the bottom of the fifth page, he says, okay. God, creator of all things, is himself no sooner created by the conscience. In other words, no sooner have we lifted God from the idea of the social me to the idea of the cosmic me, then immediately our reflection begins to demolish him under the pretext of perfecting him. To perfect the idea of God, to purify the theological dogma, was the second hallucination of the human race. Let me read the next sentence too. The spirit of analysis, that untiring Satan, who continually questions and denies, must sooner or later look for proof of religious dogmas. So this to me is kind of a movement towards atheism.
Yeah. Then the atheistic movement is the second act of the theologic drama, and the second act follows from the first as effect. So God's the thesis, atheism is the antithesis, and so I think like the way I read this whole section really is like he's putting forward, okay, this is the dialectical method I'm going to be using. When I talk about exchange value and use value later on is thesis and antithesis, and then move towards synthesis, constituted value. I want you to understand that the structure of the argumentation and like the method I'm using is what I'm laying out here with the thesis, antithesis, synthesis of to use to understand God, to contextualize God and society. So like he's talking about the atheistic movement. So Proudhon's not going to be happy with the atheistic movement. He's just going to put it as, the reaction to that to the God thesis, and then but he's going to want to move forward from atheism. It's not going to be enough for him.
And then as this movement towards atheism is occurring, you're also getting this movement towards God-man. So at the bottom, well, you guys aren't even using the book, but the existence of God and the immortality of the soul are posited by the conscience in the same judgment. There, man speaks in the name of the universe, to whose bosom he transport his me. Here he speaks in his own name without perceiving that in this going and coming he only repeats himself. So so the immortality of the soul starts coming into the picture. Then it says down a little bit lower, unless the soul is immortal, God is incomprehensible, say the theists, resembling in this the political theorists who regard sovereign representation and perpetual tenure of office as essential conditions of monarchy. But the inconsistency of the ideas is as glaring as the parity of the doctrines is exact. Consequently, the dogma of immortality soon becomes the stumbling block of philosophical theologians, who, ever since the days of Pythagoras and Orpheus, have been making futile attempts to harmonize divine attributes with human liberty and reason with faith. So he mentioned earlier how humans start perfecting this idea of God, and they start making it, crafting it into kind of how they want it to be. I think like in the Old Testament, God's like, he's scary. He's like, you got to do what he tells you. And now humans are starting to be like, well, actually we want this. Now we also want us to be immortal. We want to live forever.
Yeah. It's actually interesting because when we think of the Old Testament, we often contrast it to the New Testament, say, like God of the Old Testament is the one who sent the flood, killed everybody. God of the Old Testament is the one who destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. God of the Old Testament is the one who said, go kill everybody in Canaan. like slaughter all the Canaanites, raise Jericho to the ground, yada yada. But so if people contrast that with Jesus as God, Jesus' dad, who mellowed out a lot after he had a kid, who was like all forgiveness and caring and all that stuff. But really, actually, even in the Old Testament, that tension was already there, because in the Old Testament, you still have like God demanded hospitality, God demanded like kindness and forgiveness and shit like that. Like that's where Jesus got it all from. Is that those threads were already there in the Old Testament. So it's interesting um to think about how like if we're talking about like just the change in motion over time, like that sort of that the ideal that Jesus had for how he read the Old Testament, kind of that's a development in Christianity that might be relevant, I suppose, if we're talking about just like the changing of religion and conception of God. um I guess less violence maybe is what I'm trying to get at, but although we saw how that turned out for Christianity.
Or should I just keep reading?
I was going to, because I found where you were at, and I felt like there was a comment I wanted to make on it, but there was a specific quote, and I can't find it. I thought I highlighted it, where he said something like, like I think somebody said this earlier, but he talks about how like the moment you try to like the moment God becomes like perfected, he starts to decay. I think that's what Hades said earlier. I wanted to like talk a little bit about that and how it like fits into Proudhon's overall like philosophy of progress. Like the like a lack of movement automatically means like it starts to like decay, become irrelevant. I don't know. I feel like that's like an important thing to let sink in when we're talking about Proudhon's underlying philosophy altogether. Like in his dialectical historical approach, he just like there's just isn't room for that sort of for fixity, I guess. I don't know. I think I had more to say about that, but I kind of lost it.
Right. In philosophy of progress, instead he recast Descartes' "I think, therefore I am." He says, "I move, therefore I become," because for him everything's in motion. That's
Yeah, it's one of my favorite quotes of all time, honestly.
yeah, I agree.
I
It's
think in
very
this
powerful.
one he says, "I think, therefore I'm immortal," something along those
Mm,
lines.
Right. I did see that somewhere.
And as an extension of that, he says it's essentially it's right to say God is a part of me, but it's wrong to say I am a part of God or something along those lines. Like I'm not God, but God is within me, which I think
mm.
is the point of God as like kind of like an endpoint almost. I think that's how he treats it.
Right.
Um,
So you're right. It's like a continuation of God.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he says, I just see a quote that relates to that. He says, "And making himself like God, man made God like himself. This correlation, which for many centuries had been execrated, was the secret spring which determined the new myth. In the days of the patriarchs, God made an alliance with man. Now, to strengthen the compact, God is to become a man." Then down a little bit lower, he says, "Humanity does not yet say, 'I am God.' Such a usurpation would shock its piety. It says, 'God is in me.'" Yeah, I don't know. Just related to what you were talking about.
So I think it's like all the individuals in a society are not like they aren't God, but God is within them as like a society, like it's above them, not as individuals, but as part of a kind of collective, which I think he's getting at.
Mm-hmm.
hold on. What page are you on, out of curiosity? Case
7.
7. Okay.
Haven't gone far.
Yeah.
I like this one sentence. It says, "Christolatry is the last term of this long evolution of human thought." Olatry, in case you don't know, it just means like to, I think it means to worship something. Or
Mhm.
what is it? Like idolatry is to take an idol and fetishize it? No, worship it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
And so God man Christ is the last term in this long evolution of.
yeah. Hegel had something about how like God had to make himself into a human in the form of Christ and then die in order to be like fully realized like as a god. But then but God literally died. Like that's where
Right.
you get the death of death of God theology comes out of that. Like
Yes,
like
Zach said that.
there
But go
was a
ahead.
God, but he literally became Christ and he literally died.
Yeah.
Um,
So Zach said, he says, while he's on the cross, he says, what does he say? God, why have you forsaken me?
yeah, my God, why have you forsaken me? I don't remember the
Right.
Hebrew, or the Aramaic. But
God, Jesus was expecting God to come save him or to help him, and he doesn't. And
mhm.
it's kind of like some people take that as being like,
Yeah, the
it's done.
atheistic moment. It's a
Right.
it's a
It's
really
done. Like,
widely
yeah.
discussed thing in theology. For some reason, I just didn't highlight anything all the way until page 15. Seems like an oversight on my part, but um, if I could jump that far ahead real quick, if
Sure.
I said I highlighted, I've tried to show that the human mind was inevitably and irresistibly led to the distinction of being into me and not me, spirit and matter, soul and body. But it's interesting that he says inevitably and irresistibly led to that distinction. Like this is like historical necessity almost, like that we like had to like think about things in these sort of um binary distinctions, the me and not me, spirit, matter, soul and body. Then he goes on to say, now who does not see that the objection of the materialist proves the very thing that it is intended to deny? Man distinguishing with himself a spiritual principle and a material principle. What is this but nature herself proclaiming by turns her double essence and bearing testimony to her own laws? And notice the inconsistency of materialism. It denies and has to deny that man is free. Now, the less liberty man has, the more weight it is to be attached to his words, and the greater their claim to be regarded as the expression of truth. When I hear this machine say to me, I am soul and I am body, though such a revelation astonishes and confounds me, it is invested in my eyes that with an authority incomparably greater to that of the materialist who, correcting conscience and nature, undertakes to me um, undertakes to make them say, I am matter and only matter, and intelligence is but the material faculty of knowing. So, like, I think the dialectical mindset he's in while he's doing this is very clear right there, where he's like, especially in the sentence, who does not see that the objection of the materialist proves the very thing that it is intended to deny. Um, so, I think I honed in on that just because it's really showing this is how Proudhon's thinking. Like, you really need to like let this sink in before you read the rest of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the refutation, the antithesis is contained in the thesis. It's already there. It just it's already at work with it. Like what their position contains its negation within it already.
Right. Um, Something caught me off guard, and that is he's almost feels like Berkeley almost. He compares matter to like spirit almost as like this thing that we cannot see, we cannot perceive, that's outside of us. It's like the not me. It's almost as fictitious as the spirit almost, which he makes note of. Which I thought was pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. It's a, Devin pointed out before how he's setting them up as antimonial. I don't even know how you say it.
Antinomial. Yeah.
Antinomial terms, spirit and
Yeah.
matter. So we tend to
What
think of very binary terms. It's either all spirit or it's all matter, but he's saying, no. The two, you have to figure out how they're intertwined. And I think
Yeah.
he ends up talking about how matter is penetrable. Before, a lot of people act like the dualists like to act like there's matter and then there's the spirit realm, and they don't really penetrate except through like a pineal gland. It was like Descartes.
Pineal.
Yeah, but so now there's he's saying no, matter. There's something penetrating it that's like consciousness, or like I think that's my interpretation of him. He's saying on a biological level, matter and consciousness, they kind of fuse together in some kind of way. There's like it's more penetrable than we realize. It penetrates more than we realize.
Yeah, the antinomial thing comes right out of Kant, the critique of pure reason. You have two ideas that are both rational on their own, but also like they can't both be true at the same time, even though like internally they're rational. So like they're irreconcilable. Um, Proudhon likes to use that method. He likes to have two, like here are two things that we like. He does that with property and community. Here are two things like kind of necessary, but like we can't have both. What do we do? Like the only thing to do is like try to work it out and practice between like having free people kind of just try to figure out what works best for them. Um, like balance, justice. That's where all that stuff comes from. So if you see Proudhon trying to like make a case for something and then make a case for something else that's different and then oppose them, you bet your ass he's gonna, he's setting up an antinomial binary there. Yeah.
I think he does that with Satan as well. He mentions it as Satan as a questioner of God.
Yeah.
I know he has some history with Satan. I think Sean has posted on the Libertarian Labyrinth like the hymn of Satan or something like that.
Right. I think that comes like right after he writes this. I
Yeah.
believe. I don't think he said Satan stuff yet. I know he says it in this book, I believe.
He mentions it once, which I
Does he mention Prometheus at all in the introduction? I'm trying to remember.
In the introduction. In the economic part, he does.
Okay. Yeah, okay. We'll get there when we get there then. I don't know if Proudhon would have thought this or said it, but like sometimes Satan is spun as like a Promethean figure that like gave light to man, so to speak, like by giving
yeah.
like by tempting them with the knowledge of good and evil. There's comparable to Prometheus giving mankind fire.
That's interesting.
I don't know if that's a theme at all in this work, but
Well, yeah, I think it is because he says Satan is like bringing knowledge by questioning God, which will eventually become our his hypothesis.
yeah. Later on, he'll like use Prometheus as like the social body, like the unity collectivity is represented by Prometheus. So I think that there's probably something significant there, but again, we'll get to that when we get to that.
Yeah.
I highlighted just. Oh wait, never mind. I see why I did that. So he kind of comes after the materialist a bit, and again, like later on, like page 17, it says, for me. Actually, let me start quoting a little bit further back. Finally, there is a science which might be defined with exactness as the science of penetrability of matter. I think this is what you're kind of getting at a little bit, Case. I mean, chemistry. In fact, how does what is called chemical composition differ from penetration? In short, we know matter only through its forms. Of its substance, we know nothing. How then is it possible to affirm the reality of an invisible, impalpable, incoercible being, ever changing, ever vanishing, and impenetrable to thought alone, to which it exhibits only its disguises? Materialist, I permit you to testify to the reality of your sensations as to what occasions them. All you can say involves this reciprocity. Something which you call matter is the occasion of sensations which are felt by another something which I call spirit. But what then is the source of this supposition that matter is impenetrable, which external observation does not justify and which is not true, and what is its meaning? Here appears the triumph of dualism. Matter is pronounced impenetrable, not as the materialist and the vulgar fancy, but the testimony of the senses, but of the conscience. The me, an incomprehensible nature, feeling itself free, distinct and permanent, a meeting outside of itself another nature equally incomprehensible, but also distinct and permanent in spite of its metamorphoses, declares on the strength of the sensations and the ideas which its essence suggests to it, that the not me is extended and impenetrable. Impenetrability is a figurative term, an image by which thought, a division of the absolute, pictures to itself material reality, another division of the absolute. But this impenetrability without which matter disappears is, in the last analysis, only a spontaneous judgment of inward sensation, a metaphysical a priori, an unverified hypothesis of spirit. So, like, you're basically saying materialism presupposes a non-material something that can experience and like think about and perceive and like can penetrate the material, like to actually like make sense of it. He makes a similar move in Philosophy of Progress when he talks about the opposition between empiricism and rationalism. So like, yeah. So again, like that goes to like the dialectical process he's doing. He's not happy with materialism because it prioritizes something and kind of has to push to the margin what it has to presuppose, which is you find that in a lot of post-structuralist thought as well, particularly Derrida. That sort of move of like you're by privileging one side of a binary, you're you're having to exclude the things on the other side that make that the side you're privileging even possible in the first place. A condition for materialism is that consciousness is real, is that there's something that is greater than materiality. Not greater is not the right word, but something that
Can perceive it.
so something other than materiality is necessary for materialism to even get a start.
Mm-hmm. I think he makes a similar move. That's kind of directly analogous to God created man and then man created God, is what he said in another section.
Yeah. So it would make sense with this like sort of style of argumentation he's doing, I suppose. Like if you can't just posit God and leave it there, like this eternal being. Like you need man in order for God to even make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
In order for God to be a thing at all. But also, like you can't go with the atheist route of saying that like man is simply man without God. Like man also presupposes God in some way. I don't really understand his argument for that completely at this point, but I guess we can try to make sense of that a little bit
Yeah,
deeper.
we can always make addendums and make more notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, before he gets to the third section, right before he's verifying the hypothesis of a god. So instead, so it's like what we're talking about is theism, or is it or is it atheism? What is it? So now, before he gets to the third section, I noticed, like very briefly, he kind of will tell you what he's proposing. So he says, in a word, until we have verified to man the hypothesis of God, there is nothing definitive in the atheistic negation. It is then a scientific, that is, an empirical demonstration that the idea of God that we need, now such a demonstration has never been attempted. Theology dogmatizing on the authority of its myths, philosophy speculating by the aid of categories. God has existed as a transcendental conception, incognizable by the reason, and the hypothesis always subsists. And here's an important paragraph. It subsists, I say, this hypothesis, more tenacious, more pitiless than ever. We have reached one of those prophetic epochs where society, scornful of the past and doubtful of the future, now distractedly clings to the present, leaving a few solitary thinkers to establish the new faith. Now cries to God from the depths of its enjoyments and asks for a sign of salvation, or seeks in the spectacle of its revolutions, as in the entrails of a victim, the secret of its destiny. Why need I insist further? The hypothesis of God is allowable, for it forces itself upon every man in spite of himself. No one then can take exception to it. And then I wanted to point out, but if I possess, through the fact of my thought, the right to suppose God, I must abandon the right to affirm him. So this is an important move. He's saying that you have every right to suppose a God, but as soon as you try to affirm it, you step too far. So he says, in other words, if my hypothesis is irresistible, that for the present is all that I can pretend, for to affirm is to determine. Now every determination to be true must be reached empirically. And then he talks about how God is the great unknown. That to me is that's kind of his final statement on it almost, is that you can suppose God, but you can't affirm him.
So actually, that's kind of there's like a word play there. I don't know if it holds in French. I assume that it would. That I didn't notice until just now. So you have thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Look at hypothesis. That's like something I didn't put together before. It's almost like his synthesis is a hypothesis. So we can't we're not satisfied with theism. We're not satisfied with theism. So the synthesis of the two is a hypothesis. Is the supposition of God. We can't say anything more than the supposition. So I think that just made a little light go off that sort of linguistic connection. So I think that it's starting to make a little bit more sense to me now.
There's
Proudhon like wordplay, so it's important to note.
There's another. I assume this is a reference to Comte. Is he talks about the what is it, the the initial, like the primordial age, the sophisticated age, and then the scientific age. I think this is also an extension of that. Like his hypothesis is supposed to result in a synthesis almost, the original positing of a fictional, or not fictional, but like, a god, and then the atheistic denial, and then I guess what would become is the anti-theistic synthesis.
Right. Yeah, for Comte, it's theological, philosophical, and then scientific. And yeah, so in his last work, Proudhon follows a similar formula. He says he didn't get it from Comte, but then later he acknowledges, oh, it's very similar to his. He's saying basically a very similar thing, that society is moving from everybody's religious, then everybody's speculating, and then in the future things are scientific. And for Comte, Comte he turns everything into everybody follow my religion. That's the scientific way. Whereas Proudhon goes in a very different direction. His is saying, no, we're done with religion.
Actually, like what I was about to say is what I like about this and why I think it works with Proudhon's overall project is by positing a hypothesis as the synthesis, he's leaving it radically open. There's not he's not trying to say thus we've discovered the absolute through the dialectical method. We've discovered that we can't have the absolute through the dialectical method. It's not available to us. What we're left with is a hypothesis that we have to suppose, but that leaves there's a question mark at the end that doesn't ever get answered completely. We have to kind of just live with that uncertainty.
Oh,
Which that's
does.
very Proudhonian.
He makes a reference to this about astronomy. We presuppose that the external world is real, and then through the virtue of the consistency of our perceptions of the external world, we can arrive at systematic like sciences like astronomy from astrology. I think maybe this god is supposed to act in this kind of manner for an analysis of society.
Yeah,
But
that's very.
yeah.
But there's laws governing the universe, and that. And what you're talking about astronomy back in the day, just they would look out at the world and they would say, it's not moving. That's moving, the stars and stuff. And then when people started to say, well, actually, it's the Earth. We don't think it's in the center. The sun is stationary. Everybody would say, well, the senses, they don't tell us that we're moving. Okay, to us, everything's stationary. So that doesn't make any sense.
The world is flat. God damn it! It looks flat. Look out the window. It looks flat. Unless you live in upstate New York where I live, then it looks like it's just a bunch of hills for as far as the eye can see, which isn't very far because there's hills in the way.
Yeah, it's putting the senses and reason into this kind of reciprocal loop, I guess. Go ahead.
There was actually something I wanted to bring up earlier that I forgot. It's like in the first few pages. If we can quickly go back.
Sure.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it again. Yeah. So he's talking about social spontaneity a little bit. He says, at first, society is governed by impulses which at first blush exhibit no deliberation in design, but which gradually seem to be directed by a superior power existing outside of society. That might be something that's kind of important to talk about in relation to like what he means by God as well. Like we perceive that like society has something directing it, something that like determines its destiny. But like as we continue to go on, as we start to understand ourselves a little bit better, we see like there's deliberation, there's purpose, it's not purely like this deterministic outside force. There's he says and I observe in this connection that society never fails to evoke its genius previous to action, as if it wished the powers above to ordain what its own spontaneity has already resolved on. Lots, oracles, sacrifices, popular acclamation, public prayers are the commonest forms of these tardy deliberations of society. So it's almost like he says like in like the idea of like God or the idea of like these like like these supernatural explanations like destiny or something like that. Like it's like a ex post facto explanation for what society decided through like collective reason, through deliberation or stuff. Sorry, that was something I meant to bring up sooner, but we kind of kept moving. So
yeah. Oh.
And then the third section, swinging back, he talks about why he needs the hypothesis of a god. And I think that's so far he's set up the hypothesis of a god, what it is. And then I think in the last part, he's basically bringing it home and telling you, well, why am I even talking about God? And this where it does get gets even more difficult in my view.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, this is where it's kind of like, okay, I get it, but I don't get it. So down here he says, so social philosophy does not admit a priori that humanity can err. This is basically what you were saying. Or can be deceived in its actions. If it should, what would become of the authority of the human race, that is the authority of reason, synonymous at bottom with the sovereignty of the people? But it thinks that human judgments, always true at the time they are pronounced, can successively complete and throw light on each other in proportion to the acquisition of ideas in such a way as to maintain continual harmony between universal reason, individual speculation, and indefinitely extend the sphere of certainty, which is always a confirmation of the authority of human judgments. I don't know, that's a lot there.
So if I may venture to put it in simpler terms, like if humans can err, then like an analysis of like the social uh logic is kind of incomprehensible. Kind of like if I don't know, maybe if planets could err, then astronomy could be like incomprehensible because it would just be gibberish almost.
Yeah, like if Venus or whatever didn't have like any actual like principle to
Logic,
its
like it
movements,
just
yeah,
moved
logic
randomly.
behind it, it just kind of like, if there was nothing discernible about its movements, then like we wouldn't have a science of astronomy because there'd be nothing we could we couldn't create a model, to understand it with. There couldn't be a theory. There has to be something comprehensible for there to be a theory.
Yeah, that plays nicely because he begins to talk about the relations between profits and wages and their respective oscillations. So I'm assuming he's going to use this and apply it either explicitly or latently into a lot of economic phenomena to make sense of it.
Yeah. Okay. This is actually starting to become a little bit more clear to me. What exactly he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um,
Then he says, I'll just keep reading, I guess.
well,
Go ahead.
I was actually gonna read it if that's okay.
Oh, go for it.
Now, the first judgment of the reason, the preamble of every political constitution seeking a sanction and a principle is necessarily this: there is a God, which means that society is governed with design, premeditation, intelligence. So you have to assume that there is something discernible that governs society, and he's attaching that idea to God, which I find kind of strange. But let's see where he's going, I suppose. This judgment, which excludes chance, is then the foundation of the possibility of a social science, and every historical and positive study of social facts undertake. I like that word, that phrase, social facts, undertaken with a view to amelioration and progress, must oppose with the people the existence of God, reserving the right to account for this judgment at a later period. So yeah, so that goes back to actually, it makes me kind of glad I went back just before this to talk about what that quote from early on where he talks about like
I think
discerning like the social deliberation, whatever.
I think I just thought of an excellent analogy for God. He talks about chemistry. If we imagine a molecule like water, for example, we have an oxygen and two hydrogen atoms. They mix together. No new matter or anything is created, but a new thing is created in the relationship between hydrogen and oxygen. And this
Yeah,
relation, independent of the individuals, would be kind of God if we replace the molecules or the atoms for people, individuals, and God as the collective
yeah, the
above. Yeah.
collective being the product of collective force. Yada yada. He uses that. You're probably pulling it from this. He uses that exact analogy in his section on value.
Yeah.
Um,
I,
like you have exchange value and then use value, and they come together to like a couple molecules to create water, i.e., constituted value.
I didn't get there yet, but that
So
seems to add to the
that's
theory then.
yeah. So that I guess that works out. Are you Proudhon reincarnated? Are you remembering your past
Oh yeah,
life?
definitely.
That's cool.
Case, did you have another quote they were going to share?
No, I was going to read the exact same thing.
Oh, yeah. Damn, I have to get ready for work in like 5 minutes, but
Oh, damn. We're almost, I mean, after page 20, it kind of, it's not as deep to me. The next couple pages are the last difficulty spot for me. Then he says, I need the hypothesis of God not only, as I have just said, to give a meaning to history, but also to legitimate the reforms to be effected in the name of science in the state. And then down a little bit, he says, it always follows that the manifestations of social activity necessarily appearing to us either as indications of the will of the supreme being or as a sort of language typical of general and impersonal reason, or finally as landmarks of necessity, are absolute authority for us. Being connected in time as well as in spirit, the facts accomplished determine and legitimate the facts to be accomplished. Science and destiny are in accord. Everything which happens resulting from reason, and reciprocally, reason judging only from experience of that which happens. Science has a right to participate in government, and that which establishes its competency as consular justifies its intervention as a sovereign. So he's saying to me is that he needs the hypothesis of God to legitimate the possibility of science kind of leading the way of society, if that
like
makes
a
sense.
scientific socialism almost.
Right.
Yeah.
this was it's in the next chapter that he calls for a scientific socialism, so it makes a lot of sense.
Didn't he come up with that term?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't Marx.
Yeah, Marx gets the credit.
Marx
Fucking Marx.
is much more like authoritarian, whereas is much more of a positivist, a traditional positivist view of science, which is not nearly as today. When we think of science, we tend to think of certainty and very authoritarian discipline, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. That's kind of how I see his approach to science.
What is a positivism?
You're asking the right guy.
Well, okay, so today...
Well, that's my cue to go. No, I'm just kidding. No.
When you say positivism today, people typically think logical positivism, which is that science can tell you certain things that, that can never be disproven in time. You can leave, Devin, if you need to. I know. But
I got a minute or two.
It's recording, don't worry.
In the beginning of the socialist movement, some people say it started with Saint-Simon, and he was the first person to come up with this idea of positivism, which is the notion that we could use science to rearrange society. So if we study society, we can then look at these institutions and change how they're oriented. And so Saint-Simon, his big thing was saying, look, all these institutions, they come from the feudal past. They come from a religious time period. And he viewed those as connected, religion and the state. So he's saying, well, what can we do to these two big things, the spiritual and temporal realm, to kind of give them to make them up to date? And so Comte was his secretary at one point, and then he kind of develops this idea of positivism. And then Spencer took it. And then today, though, it's kind of dead. So
yeah, it's dead. It lives on in you, though.
Yeah. No, there's a few other people.
Realm.
Randall Collins.
When Case passes away, I'll write a eulogy for him, or like a title it "The Last Positivist" or something like that.
Thank you. There's a guy on Twitter who goes by that, but he's a logical positivist.
That son of a bitch.
Yeah, I know.
Really not a big fan of logical positivists.
No.
All right,
And
I'm
the
gonna
thing-
actually unplug my mic and just listen from my computer speakers while I get ready for work. So, but I won't be saying anything after this. So.
All right, Devin. Nice talking with you.
Yep, peace, dudes.
See ya.
One other thing between the difference with positivism and logical positivism is that positivism, the original one, is very linked to history. And it's saying our state of knowledge at our time relates to our historical positioning. A logical positivism is scrapping history and saying, no. History, throw that shit out. Okay, that's not science. Science is the certainty. Okay? In logical positivism, they kept going with this trying to be certain, that that they wound up getting themselves into like a pretzel, and they wound up defeating themselves, basically. The big part, with the scientific method, you have deduction and induction. Deduction goes from some general statement to some very narrow thing. With that, you can be certain in deduction. But with induction, where you start with observation, very specific, and you're trying to get more general, there's always you can never be, it's probabilistic more than it is certain. And so logical positivists, they try to figure out how can we get rid of induction, basically. You can't really. You always, observation are a key part of science. And this is not what the positivists originally were saying. So they kind of took positivism and wrecked it, basically. Okay, I think this is a good quote here. He says, "If then humanity is not God, it is a continuation of God. Or, if a different phraseology be preferred, that which humanity does today by design is the same thing that it began by instinct, and which nature seems to accomplish by necessity. In all these cases, and whichever opinion we may choose, one thing remains certain, the unity of action and law."
I think he's developing a theme here. I think he makes more explicit later. It's essentially like the things we presupposed in our like primordial phases, and then like, oh, we don't like that in the sophisticated metaphysical stage. We eventually kind of return back to in the scientific era. An example he gives later is that originally we believed in like what is it called? Abiogenesis, almost like things were just created by God or whatever. And then we saw, oh, they're evolving. And then we come back to, oh, they had to be evolved from some original thing. And then that leads into a quote that he pulls. A little philosophy will turn man away from God, but a lot of philosophy will turn him back to God, which I think he's trying to do here.
Right, back to like the religious question, because it's very big. Like, what is this? No, those are great points, and it reminds me of Comte that we're talking about, the original positivist. So what Comte did then is go through each of the sciences to show how they kind of go through this. They start with theological, which for him means emotional. It's very kind of spontaneous, instinctual. You feel it. It's very feeling based. And then you get to philosophy, and it's a rejection of that kind of feelingness, and it's a reason. It's no. Don't tell me this fuzzy-duzzy, lovey-dovey stuff. I want to hear the facts, okay? And that's the philosophy. It's pure speculation, he's saying. But when you do that philosophical stage, it's like everybody has their own way of looking at it. And what Comte does, he shows that each phase, each discipline goes to this kind of, you start with this emotional, and then it gets to the rational, and then the scientific stage, instead of it going like a continuation, kind of falls back into this kind of balance between the emotional theological stage and the rational philosophical stage. So the scientific stage he sees as being like a mediator between the two and in every discipline. And he shows this he starts with math, and then he goes into astronomy, and then he goes into chemistry, and then he shows how it's starting in biology. At his time, biology had not taken off. And then he argues, oh, okay, you can apply the same kind of thinking to sociology, which comes out of biology.
Biology still is kind of almost borderline a soft science, even. It's still we don't understand a lot.
Yeah, well, that's everything. We don't understand a lot. But you can look through, so the first big kind of positivist view of biology comes with like Darwin and evolution, kind of this kind of macro, but Darwin, there's not really much quantitative data. It's more like a qualitative research.
I visit some islands, I see the birds, and
yeah. But it makes logical sense. And then in the 20th century, you get the Crick guy with the DNA of coming up with like microbiology, to my understanding. But and then fast forward, I'm no expert on biology, but in the 90s, you get this cognitive revolution where they're doing like MRI scans and they're really starting to understand the brain. This is only like 30 years ago. So what you're saying is like biology, yeah, there's a lot of questions that are unanswered. And with time, we're getting much, much better at understanding biology. And we know that sociology comes out of the social realm, comes out of our biological makeup, but it's not determined by biology. It's its own realm, the social realm. Um, yeah, studying the brain is going to, without question, give great insight into the social world.
This might be tangential, but I'm super curious if we had all the facts about the brain, like we could just snap it into existence for our hypothetical, could we really make that many accurate predictions of like society based on that? Like I think man is so much more than like our brain. Like we're mostly our environment, right?
Right. Well, yeah, the brain soaks in the environment. There's like a dialectical link. So yeah, you have to can't just be a brain by itself. But yeah, a brain who soaks up the social realm, who soaks up the meaning we're constructing it between us. It's a process of negotiation. And that's how all these words that I'm spitting out of my mouth, we all have a common shared understanding of each word, and it's like rapid fire. You don't even have to think about it, because all these things have been learned through the 30 odd years I've been alive. And it's bizarre how the brain can just kind of suck up stuff that's going on in your conscious stuff into this non-conscious realm and it's just loaded. I mean, you got so much stuff, and we all do. And that's how we can communicate with a total stranger, because we have all learned these shared meanings that we are socially constructed. Yeah.
Is social construct a social construct?
Would you say social construct or social construction?
Is social construction a social construct?
Is the category of a social construct a social construction? I mean, any label that we use is socially constructed. Every noise coming out of my mouth, the fact that you give it meaning implies that it's socially constructed. So the very idea of social construction is socially constructed,
and therefore it is divine because it exists outside of us.
Yeah, I mean it's some truth in that. I mean, yeah, I mean Proudhon's idea about the sum of the individuals, society is bigger than that. Like there's something, this realm that's even bigger than our individual realms. It's a very difficult concept to wrap your head around, but once you kind of do, it kind of explains a lot.
For those listening, or if I upload this and you guys, in my chemistry textbook, they explicitly said we treat molecules as more than the sum of their parts. So this is not like some kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, like this kind of crankery Proudhon is cooking up. This is like stuff that modern scientists accept about how the world
mysticism.
works.
Mm-hmm.
I got ready for it kind of fast. I wanted to say a couple things about what you guys were saying before, if that's okay. So,
No.
well, fuck you. It's my server. No, so Hades, you asked a question. You said, I didn't hear the second part. You said something like, if we looked at the brain, could we understand society through understanding the brain? Is that
like if we had all the facts about how the brain works and everything, I don't think we could comprehend what society is or like how it works just based on that.
Okay, yeah. No, yeah, absolutely not. Especially since like the society you're in affects your brain so much, So
yep, exactly.
At best, you might be able to say something about the society that brain was raised in. But Case might know this. When I took my intro to sociology class, we talked a little bit about feral children, and there was a specific case. I don't remember the girl's name. There was a 7-year-old girl who was found who hadn't been socialized really. She was just like left in her room. Literally, the room was full of shit. She was just barely given enough to survive on, and she had what they diagnosed her with, like an acquired form of autism, essentially, because her brain did not develop the way it typically would if she had actually had socialization. So, and any neurologist, any child developmental psychologist, any doctor will tell you the early years of a human being's life, the brain is very plastic and depends heavily on a social environment to help it develop the way it needs to in order to survive in the world. So that girl, I don't think will ever learn to speak. Like it's just that time has passed for her, unfortunately.
This
Um,
actually
I mean,
gave
there
me
was
a
there was
brain.
a
Can
case.
I speak for a
Can
second?
can I say?
This
you guys
came,
have to fight over who can speak.
yeah, I'm dominating right now.
I say.
I think this is the ultimate point. Humans
Okay, woman
shape
first.
their world, and the world shapes us. Is what Proudhon is ultimately getting at. I think that's a big part implicitly that he's suggesting.
Yeah, that's a really important part of the dialectical perspective he's trying to share. And to that point, just before I lose it, sorry, Epik.
Yeah, you can speak.
I was gonna say that what I realized about the other thing I wanted to say was that what I realized about what he's doing with God is like it's not simply that like well I won't say that he's using God because you need an idea of what is absolute and unchanging to make any sense of what's not absolute and what is changing. So like to render what would otherwise be inscrutable, you need an idea of what is actually scrutable. You need like so, and that goes to like what we were saying with the movement of plants, stuff like that. We need to be able to have an idea that we can make any sense of human society, that there's any kind of laws that don't change regarding human society in order to actually have a science of human society. Otherwise, we're fucked.
That's a good point.
So does that work for you, Case?
Yeah, I was gonna say more, but I was gonna let Epik talk for a second.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Epik. Sorry.
Yeah, about the brain development. There was a Holy Roman Emperor that isolated an newborn child, and it died in isolation, even though it was fed.
Wow, I never heard that story.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me though.
Oh,
So it just
there's been
died
some.
from pure isolation.
Yeah, even though it was fed.
Oh, that's interesting.
Caretakers were not allowed to talk to the baby.
So there's been some social psychology studies, particularly on chimpanzees. I mean, I kind of hate that they've done it, but they've done it. So it's kind of like, why not look at what they found? In the 70s, they used to do all kind of chimpanzee experiments, and some of them got interested in sociology. And what they found, they would do this experiment called the mirror test, which is you make an animal pass out, or they fall asleep. You put something on their head, like a mark on their head. You put a mirror in their room, and when they wake up, you see when they get in front of the mirror, do they realize that what's on their head is like a mark that someone put there? So they try to see, does the chimp go for the mark? And what they found is, if they've been in isolation their whole life, when they put them in front of the mirror, they do not recognize themselves in the mirror. Meaning they look at the mirror, but they don't understand what's going on, and therefore they don't touch the thing on their head. However, when they compared it to socialized monkeys, chimps, socialized chimps nearly always went for the mark on their head. And then the last thing they did in the study was they took these isolated chimps that couldn't recognize themselves in the mirror, they put them around other chimps for a while, and then they did the same experiment again, and they found that they do nearly always go for they understand now that they are the object in the mirror. So it takes being socialized to even understand when you look in the mirror that you're an object. That's how far the social realm goes. It's deep, much deeper than we like to think.
The I versus the me, the I recognizing myself as a subject, the me recognizing myself as an object.
You got it. I mean, that's it. And then, the other level, which Gurvich kind of pioneered, and Durkheim, is the we to the I. But that's more, we talk about that another time. Not really dealing with that.
And like Proudhon talks about that here, the recognition of the me and the not me. You need to have a not me in order to have a conception of the me.
Right.
And that comes right out of Hegel. With the master slave dialectic, I think was very important for social psychology, social science in general, understanding
Yep.
just the fact that you need an other to have a same was vital to the development of a social science that was worth anything.
Yeah, you brought up Mead a second ago. You said the I and the me. That
Mhm.
comes right out of Hegel. I mean, they were all the early pragmatists were very interested in German idealism. And yeah, Mead basically takes what his insight is takes Hegel, puts it into a behaviorist framework. So he uses behaviorism and is able to explain everything that Hegel explains using this kind of biological approach. It's really interesting approach.
Yeah, that's been used in Mead. That's been used in like Foucault in his essay "Subject and Power" talks about how subjects become subjects by realizing that they're objects, by being objectified is how you become a subject. So, yeah, it's cool that these themes are in Proudhon, and it really shows like the fact that he's not considered like one of the early founders of social science is it's fucking criminal.
Yeah, I always call him the illegitimate father of sociology. They don't want him to be in there, you know. The dirty anarchist, you know.
I was so happy with reading those Ansar pieces. I was like, oh my god, this is like cathartic for me.
Sean Murdoch, right over there, he translated all of them.
So
God
I know
bless.
you're not saying anything back, but thank you for that, Sean.
Well, I mean, to be honest, the rest of the chapter is not a lot more. I kind of really didn't make that many notes in the 20s pages, and then it ends on page 29 for me.
I suppose.
I didn't get into that, but I have read that before, but the first time I read that whole introductory section, I like my eyes like crossed. I just did not make any sense of it.
Yeah, I agree. It's difficult.
Next week we'll deal with chapter 2, I assume, or not chapter 2, chapter 1.
Yeah, and that's gonna be much easier to discuss, I think, than God.
Oh yeah, I think that basically until the conclusion of the first volume, I think we're probably going to have a much easier time. Especially since we dwelt so much on this section, and like this section, like I keep stressing, is like Proudhon's like, you're not going to understand what I'm doing unless you understand this section. And I think that's true. I think I have a much better understanding of what he's doing in the sections that I remember a little bit better and understood a little bit better. I think I understand them even better now that I understand this section better. So
yeah, to kind of recap on what I see the value of talking about God for an economic thing is he's developing this idea of collective reason. And so for him, the collective reason starts with the idea of God, and that's the first that's the anchor. And then from this idea of God, the collective reason moves to like space and time, things like that. And then before you know it, it's at the economic world. And he's beginning the collective reason with value. And he's showing how value also comes out of this collective reason. And then the rest of the book is basically how, okay, well, value then gives rise to the division of labor. The division of labor gives. He's showing how this collective reason kind of moved over time.
Yeah, it's funny. Like if you read this, you could read this introductory chapter and just be like, "Oh, Proudhon's an idealist. Proudhon's an idealist." But if you actually fucking like engage with it on the level we just have, like it's easy to see. This guy is fucking brilliant, and he's nuts, but brilliant.
Yeah. And he's saying, like, and Marx will charge him with being an idealist, but what he's really saying is that collective reason comes out of collective action. It comes out of the practice itself.
Yeah.
This will be a Durkheimian way of looking at it, which is much later.
What's it called? Practice theory or something like that? Practical? I don't know.
I kind of consider it just like pragmatism, or just well, okay, there's action. This is pragmatists deal with the individual level, which is okay. Action leads to ideas and experience, whereas this Proudhon and then Durkheim are dealing with the collective level, which is you have collective action, which leads to collective reason and collective force. And so he's showing you how this collective action, which is economic activity, is going to lead to a collective reason.
Oh yeah. So practice theory is out of Pierre Bourdieu, who is a French sociologist. The guy Ansar talks about in the contemporary one. He spent a lot of time talking about Bourdieu in relation to Proudhon. So like practice theory, like is a body of social theory within anthropology and sociology that explains society and culture as a result of structure and individual agency. But it puts a lot of emphasis on agency and like actually doing things, practicing things, like what do we actually do and how do we objectivate? That's also something in the Berger and Luckman. Yeah, this is something I'm excited about it because it's what I've been practice theory and like stuff like that is what I've been working with a lot for my current work in sociology. So seeing it seeing Proudhon have that strand as early as he was writing is really exciting, especially as somebody who wants to use Proudhon for sociology. So, yeah, pardon my excitement.
Perfectly warranted.
But all right.
Is this the natural conclusion?
This feels like the natural conclusion. I was gonna say if we were gonna keep talking, I can actually. I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner. My half-hour commute, I have Bluetooth in my car. I could still participate in the discussion while I was driving to work. But if we're gonna conclude here, perfectly fine with that.
All right, sounds good to me.
I'm glad I hopped in, even though I didn't finish the introduction by myself. It was a weird week, but I'm glad I kind of seemed to snap myself out of it yesterday. I think this was productive.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be the most difficult chapter and that's why it's going to be difficult to get into the book. It was getting over the first chapter, so I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, and recording it was a good idea as well because anybody who's struggling with the first section and wasn't able to make it, I think they're gonna have an easier time because I think we weren't very systematic with how we covered it, but I think we had some insights here that are gonna make it a lot easier for whoever is struggling to understand it.
If you've read this chapter beforehand and then watch this, I guarantee you'll know what we're saying, even if you don't understand it, if you don't read it.
Yeah. It may even be a good idea to synthesize some notes from this discussion and from our highlights and notes in the book, and maybe at some point, doesn't have to be soon. Maybe at some point, this is something maybe we could do for the whole book. Just kind of
like
summarize everything we've said, summarize everything we think Proudhon's saying, and kind of use that as like a stand-in for the fact that this book doesn't have a companion the way Capital has a companion.
Like
that was something we were complaining about.
Sean Wilbur has some notes on what is property, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Something just to like, and maybe eventually someday we can turn it into a proper companion. But just like a section summary. Here's what we think Proudhon's doing. Here's what we said about it.
Yeah.
And just kind of highlight some of the ideas. I think that could be useful because one of the hardest things about Proudhon is he's not an easy person to read. That sounds like a tautology, but let me finish. One of the hardest things about Proudhon is he's not an easy person to read, and there's nobody who really tries to make him easier.
No one can hold your hand.
Yeah. There's no one like Sean kind of can, but Sean's a very busy man, so he's got enough going on. So like if we're able to make Proudhon scrutable to the average reader, the average political philosophy enjoyer on the internet, then we might actually be able to rope in some more mutualists.
Yeah.
All right,
and making sociology more accessible is kind of something I want to do anyway. So
yeah, likewise.
I personally think that everybody should be forced to learn sociology from an early age. But
yeah.
When people ask you what sociology is, because I'm sure they have, what do you usually tell them?
I say study society.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll say that, but then they'll be like, "Well, what does that mean?" And like, because people don't realize that society exists. Like
yeah, they don't.
We're so fucking individualist in America that like everybody just thinks it's psychology because they can only think at that level.
Right.
I usually give them the C. Wright Mills line about how it's the reconciliation of individual biography with history, and that I've had that either make a light go off in their head that I can visibly see in their face, or it just made it worse. So depends on who I'm talking to, whether or not they understand it.
Oh yeah, about the like individualism and collectivism dichotomy. Like in here, we think of society as like the state leading the people.
Mm-hmm. Right, you're saying as something external, so this macro force, and that's how people generally think of society as something outside of us, something out there. That's imposing itself onto the individual. But once you really delve into what society is, it goes much deeper than that. There's a society within you, immanent within the individual. It's a paradox almost that society really is on every level, and there's certain levels that it sucks. I'm not explaining it the best, but on the surface level, it appears that it's all external to us and oppressive. But once you get in deep, you realize that society, it pervades everything. It's much deeper than we realize.
Yeah. The whole like self-made man bullshit. I don't know if they have that in Finland, but like in America, there's like this mythology of like the self-made man that like you earn
No,
everything yourself,
we
everything you
don't.
have, you deserve yourself. It's like the more you understand, just like society in general, and just like how much an individual person depends on the society that they came from, even if they're a relatively, um, even if they're relatively independent, they're still dependent as fuck. Uh,
I,
deeply dependent on other people to survive.
I think could be wrong on this, but I think that kind of mentality originated in the early stages of America in the 1800s when most of America was just like self-sufficient peasants, basically self-sufficient like landowners or whatever.
Yeah, I think it comes from that, and also, and these aren't mutually exclusive and actually deeply interconnected. It's the sort of Protestant like individual personal relationship with God sort of thing, and that the sort of self-sufficiency that was taught by Protestantism kind of reinforced that. But I think that absolutely, that was there was a mutual co-determination between that and attitude and like the peasant, the individual like self-sufficient peasant sort of thing that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But
I would also like to add one more thing. You talked about society and the state. I guess I'm kind of skipping ahead, but Proudhon has a kind of weird conception of the state as kind of like the collectivity of a nation almost.
yeah,
It's
it
it's not
the state
exactly it's not
the
exactly
state
like a governing body. It's like a force, like a collective entity of society almost.
Yeah, in that sense, there could be an anarchist state because for Proudhon, the state is like what persists over time in a society, like almost like the institutional structures that remain in place and the systems that remain in place and that kind of mediate between people and especially over generations. Um, that that isn't going to that's skipping ahead not in this book, that's skipping ahead in Proudhon's career because that's not really going to come
Yeah,
out
much later.
until yeah, like I think the late 50s, early 60s when he was like practically like when he was a few years away from dying. So, um his notion of the state at this time would have been much more traditional. I think this is around the time he would have been saying the state is the external constitution of the social body or something like that. But he eventually comes to see the state as like something that is imminent but also more than the sum of its parts. Of course, it's a unity. It's a unity collectivity of like the totality of a society. Um,
I think he changes his language at some point. I think Sean Wilbur has said this. Like he changes his language to represent new ideas with old words, essentially, to make it like more graspable. I think,
yeah, which unfortunately, just because of the way our vocabulary and nowadays works, kind of makes it a little bit confusing.
especially when we're
Um,
translating it from.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank God we have Sean to try to make this a little bit more like scrutable. But yeah. So what Proudhon winds up critiquing later on isn't the state as such. It's governmentalism. It's the principle of authority that the state uses to organize itself is the problem. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I talk about that a little bit in a comment I made on Reddit yesterday, which I was actually kind of hoping somebody would respond to that comment because
Is it
kind of
on
felt like a
the mutualism subreddit?
yeah. Somebody asked a question about Proudhon and Marx, and um,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
I think I read it.
yeah, I got a lot of likes for that comment, but I was kind of hoping Sean would chime in and tell me if I got anything wrong, but he didn't. So I guess I didn't get anything wrong. But I don't
Yeah.
know. It was kind of a big write up. So I was like, there's got to be something I'm missing here, but I don't know.
You don't need to summarize a complete history in a Reddit comment, by the way.
I don't?
Yeah.
Fuck. That's good news.
Yeah. So,
Does he have a Discord?
What'd you say?
Weird question. Does he have a Discord?
Sean?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's AKA Bookish.
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah.
Oh.
Don't leak it on the video. I don't want to censor anything.
Oh.
Or
Yeah.
should we?
I don't know. I don't know if Sean would care, but probably best to play it safe.
Yeah. It's privacy.
But yeah, you've been interacting with Sean already, I'm sure, or at least reading what he has to say in the Discord. I was pleasantly surprised when he joined in because I didn't expect him to. But I'm glad as hell he's here.
How did I not know this?
I think Anarchism the Dancer didn't realize that either. He was like, "Hey, we should really get him in here," and I was like, "He's already here."
Yeah. Should I invite? I'm a patron to Kevin Carson. Do you think I should send him an invite link to this?
I've considered that a couple times. It would be cool to have Carson here. At the same time, how many big names in mutualism do we want in here? Because I worry a little bit that people will just like kind of it will become less of a free form discussion and more of just like a let's see what Sean and Carson have to think. You know? Do you see what I mean?
We already
I
have
understand what you mean.
Carson of
Yeah,
Proudhon
like
here, so
it would be
why not?
awesome to get him in here for like Q&As or to like maybe do a voice chat with him. I think he's pretty open to that stuff. He's done interviews before. I think Case has interviewed him before.
I think
Yeah.
it's good
I did.
because, as you said, there's kind of like a big learning curve to mutualism that I think having like people to give us some kind of guardrails to kind of like bounce off of is a good idea.
Yeah. You know what? Fuck it. If you wanted to try to get him in here, do it.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
I don't think he's the kind of person who would just be like a conversation ender anyway. But
No.
never mind.
Well,
I think that fear is unfounded.
he goes on Twitter like a motherfucker. He's tweets a lot. It's not a bad thing.
Didn't get banned yet.
Yeah. Fuck it. Let's see if we can get him in here.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if he'd be like a regular
Didn't
contributor,
he-
but it would actually be kind of fun to see Carson just like tear into some of the Hoppians we occasionally get coming through.
Yeah,
Thanks,
he's really
Skip.
good at that.
Did he
I think we need to
like
have a
get
Memorial
banned from
Day.
Twitter?
What did
What'd
you
you
say,
say?
Epik?
Didn't he like get banned from Twitter?
Did Carson get banned from Twitter?
Yeah, I saw his account being terminated a while ago.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
His
Banned
username
a
is
lot.
constructing
was a year.
post-capitalism. That's his Twitter
Yeah.
right now.
Right. He made that Twitter after he got banned like a couple of years ago.
Did he
okay.
What did he get banned for?
I don't know. There was some kind of moment in time where they were banning like anybody anarchist related.
Oh.
With like
Sucks.
they like made where it says not be allowed to take PayPal or something. I don't really know exactly why Carson got banned, but I remember he got banned, and then a month later he opened up a new Twitter. Anyway, I gotta go.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave in a second.
Okay. See you guys.
I was just gonna say real quick. I'm actually glad that this Discord has kind of taken off because I didn't actually expect it to ever get this busy. Because the last few years, that like Facebook used to be like the main place for like where mutualists would convene, but Facebook has been dead for us for a long time.
Obsolete.
So I was like, yeah. So I was like, I use Discord, and it seems like all the young people are using Discord now, and so I was like, fuck it, let's see if I can get it going.
Yeah.
But I think I might reshare the link on Reddit too, just to see if we can bring more people in now that we've got a few more mods than just me. But I don't know. I could see it being too busy in here to the point where it would be hard to really have good conversations. But we do have a shit ton of text channels, so.
Oh yeah, it'll disperse.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
anyway,
I'm gonna stop recording.
Yeah, I'm gonna